are continuing our series of looking at the psychology of the characters in Atlas Shrugged. And today we have the pleasure of looking at Cheryl Brooks, and I will keep her name Cheryl Brooks for the, rather than what it becomes. So I will just start by giving a little introduction of her. Cheryl is this incredibly delightful young sales girl in a dime store. And she has such a vibrancy for life. She has had the courage to leave her family. She left 6 months ago. She's only 19 years old. And she goes to New York because her family came from the slums and never wanted to leave the slums. So they were stinking poor and never wanted to do anything about it. Both, the plumbing's gone, the kitchen's filthy. It doesn't matter. They won't move. They won't move there. I want to say, but they won't move at all. So she is in the dime store working as a sales girl, and she's got her plastic jewelry on, and James Taggart has just come from one of the most fraudulent, he's had so many events in his life. The John Galt line has just been completed, and he has been successful, not just completed. And Taggart's stock is soaring, and the board of directors is telling him how great he is, but with this cunning smile, meaning they know that he's a fraud and they're a fraud too. He leaves. He doesn't want to go to their banquet, but he doesn't want to be alone with his own thoughts. That's a dangerous place for James Taggart to be. So he's telling himself he's got a cold. He goes into this dime store to get a tissue, a clinic, buy some tissues. And he meets Cheryl, who recognizes him. And she goes, "Oh my God, nothing this important has ever happened in my life." I'm obviously paraphrasing. And she's so exuberant to meet him and says he must feel so wonderful. And then the evil starts. James says, "I don't feel good tonight." And it goes downhill from there. But what I want to present at the outset, and then I will turn it over to Andy and then Shoshana, is that this is a girl who has such a vibrancy, such a passion for her life, such courage, such hero. Andy, this will be good for you, but the hero worship part that to of all people meet James Taggart's really sad. And so go for it, Andy.
I think we start out by saying spoiler alert, right?
Yes.
Spoiler alert. Anybody hasn't read the book, read it first because it's a mystery, and we're gonna, this discussion will contain many spoilers. So, with that said, Cheryl Brooks is a hero worshiper par excellence, and that's why Jim Taggart kills her. I mean, that's the essence right here. She really is a beautiful soul. She's going to be a self-made woman. She broke, like you said, she broke away from, her family, who's just don't have any ambition, and she's going to make her own way in the world. And she's starting out, and she has tremendous admiration for the construction and success of the John Galt line, for achievement as such, by extension to promote human life on Earth. She mistakenly thinks Jim Taggart is responsible for the construction of the John Galt line, when we know obviously it's Dagny, and all Jim provided were the impediments. But she falls in love with Dagny, through Jim, thinking, mistaking him for the builder. And the most important thing then is that Jim Taggart, his motivation, and this is more about him than about her, but Jim Taggart's motivation in their relationship and his reason for marrying her is to destroy her. And the reason, and we discussed this when we were discussing Taggart, but it bears repetition in this context. Jim Taggart really is at war with reality. Reality does not bend to his whims, and so he hates it. He's resentful. He's a frustrated whim worshiper. But reality is impervious to him. You can't war against reality. It's just you can't harm it. There's nothing you could do to it. And so the stand-in for Jim Taggart are the heroes who can deal effectively with reality, who are rational. They're not whim worshippers. They're focused on facts, first, foremost, and always, not their feelings. And so they can build and create, and achieve. And so he hates Stagny, and he hates Francisco, and he hates Reardon. But then he has some possibility of wounding or disfiguring or harming, because they're human beings, and you could war against human beings. But they're also human beings who are much bigger, stronger, and mentally tougher than he is. So it's hard for him to bring them down. So the heroes, like Francisco, let's say, he hates, are stand-in for reality, which is his fundamental, source of animus. But he can't do that. He can't harm reality at all. He can't do that much to the heroes. But the hero worshiper, the Cheryl Brooks, who so admires these people he despises, she's vulnerable. She's not as smart as Dagny or as as Francisco. She doesn't understand what Dagny and Francisco understand. They see as evil. She gets sucked in, and so Jim Taggart's it's just the most horrendous and nihilistic motivation you could possibly imagine. Destroy this innocent girl, this vibrantly alive girl, for her virtues, and this is ne plus ultra of hatred of the good. For being the good, destroy her as the stand-in for the Franciscos and the Dagnys, whom he can only wound superficially, who are themselves stand-in for reality that he can't harm, at all. So Ayn Rand's, I also want to say one last thing before I turn it over to Shoshana. Ayn Rand's analysis here of the depth of evil is just stunning. The way you understand Jim Taggart's character, and poor Cheryl, who's such a good person. She has such a good heart, such a beautiful soul. Like a fly, she's drawn into the spider's web and then killed.
Mm-hmm. Like a butterfly.
Yeah, beautiful butterfly. That's right.
Shoshana.
Yes, well, I think that Andy, you did a great job of explaining things from James Taggart's point of view, which doesn't mean that you're a stand-in for James Taggart, but I think that yeah, I'm just saying, okay. And I want to see it from Cheryl's point of view, which doesn't mean that I'm the same as Cheryl either. But I think that part of what we have with Cheryl is that that is her role in the novel, is that she's, a way for us to see another version of a good person who's not one of the main heroes, because she's young, she doesn't have the ability. And it's also a way to see that James Taggart doesn't just pick on the heroes, but he picks on anybody who's got some quality of being a friend of reality, because that means that's someone on the wrong team. Now, what I think is so striking about Cheryl, as you said, Ellen, she's got a backstory. She got out of Buffalo, and she got out of that family. And she even says, I took a Taggart train. And of course, from her point of view, it's as if taking a Taggart train means that she's part of the world of Taggart, which Taggart Transcontinental, which she interprets as a good thing. And that's Cheryl all over, that she just wants to be part of the good things going on. And so she reads the newspapers, and she's read about the John Galt line, and she's very excited about that. And when she sees him in front of her, she says, are you James Taggart? Now, that's actually a pretty deep question, because the truth of the matter is that he's not the James Taggart she thinks he is. Yeah. And that by the end of her days, she's going to find out just exactly what it means for her to be in the company of James Taggart. But I wouldn't necessarily recognize a captain of industry, especially a fake captain of industry, but she sees him and she speaks to him and she tells him what she thinks. And he says, yeah, you're some kind of hero worship. She says, well, sure. What do we have to look up to? And she's very authentic. She speaks what she feels. She speaks what she thinks. She's not afraid to do that. And I think that part of the change that happens in Cheryl is we see what happens when she becomes afraid, because with her family, she wasn't afraid, and that she could get out of there. And the problem for Cheryl is what's going to happen if she finds herself in the company of a family or some kind, or a big family, some kind of evil that she can't just get away from by taking a Taggart train, because Cheryl is not afraid if she can get away. And she thought that she got away. Now, right. She confides in him. She talks about being flea bitten. And when he talks about, he doesn't feel comfortable either, she says, I guess there were just, bigger fleas. And she wants as almost to offer him the benefit of her own experience. You can survive that and she keeps interpreting everything he says in such a generous way. He says, well, I didn't want to see anybody cheat. And she said, well, that's true. Nobody's good enough for you.
Yeah.
Well, that's maybe what it would mean if she said something like that, wanting to be alone, wanting to be only among people of her own spirit, of whom she doesn't have a lot in her life right now. And then he starts disparaging good people, and she listens and she doesn't join in, and she figures, well, I just don't understand that. Yeah. And later on, we get the flashback when she's getting married of what it was like when he would insult people. And that's kind of Cheryl's way. Instead of thinking, uh-oh, here is the early warning sign of a bozo, someone I need to watch out for. Instead, she thinks, well, I don't understand.
Right.
And
I'll
of course,
learn.
later on, it's not to be afraid, but to learn and to find out.
Right.
But when she meets him that night in the dime store, she is puzzled by some things, but it's as if the whole thing, the whole experience is such an adventure for her that she doesn't think to herself, James Taggart, whom I admire and who built the John Galt line, he couldn't mean what he seems to be saying. And he wants to see me. Right. I have something to offer him. Well, she knows that I think that she does have some sense of her own virtue.
She always gives him the benefit of the doubt, always.
Yeah. She doesn't have the sense that she'd be important to him, but maybe that's a good mark on him. It's a tribute to him if he wants to be with a good person, even though she thinks that she's not great enough and high enough for him. So, all the way through, I think that we see that something like Eddie Willer's, that she doesn't ask all the questions she should, but she's a lot younger than Eddie Willer's. She's half a generation younger, and she hasn't had the experiences that Eddie Willer's has had. And so it's kind of as if we look at the two of them and we think, oh, here she is, as you say, walking into the web, and she doesn't know it. And yet I think that in Cheryl's case, we can understand how it is that she doesn't know it. Now, of course, I just have one more thing to say, and then we can kind of keep going, Cheryl, which is that there's obviously, there's a parallel here to, of all people, Hank Rearden. Because Hank Rearden, he's not 19, he's had lots of experiences, but he also has that quality of wanting to think the best of people and trying to figure out how they couldn't mean what they seem to mean. They couldn't be crazy, and trying to, cut them slack. And of course, in the as Cheryl's story develops, and maybe you want to continue with that, she starts acting like Hank Rearden to the extent of taking upon herself the burden of unearned guilt. There's something wrong with me. And I guess I'll have to say it because it's such a striking thing. I mean, Ayn Rand's such a wonderful writer of scenes. The way that scene ends is that he insults her, and she feels bad. And he feels as if he's gotten revenge. He feels as if he's gotten revenge on all the people who cheered the John Galt line, because what she says, and again, it's Cheryl, with her honesty saying, anyone else, he would have wanted something from me, meaning a sexual favor. And it's true that though she would not have exceeded, but she's trying to compliment him. Little Cheryl is trying to compliment him for not turning this into a situation that would be degrading for her. Right. Okay. Right. So she means that kindly. She means it as a tribute. Now, what she doesn't know is that on James Taggart's part, the people he has sexual desires for are the bad people. Right. And so, in fact, that he doesn't take this to what's called the usual conclusion for an adventure of this kind is that she's a good person. So he doesn't feel desire for her. But she says, anyone else? And he says, would you? Yeah. And then she blushes and she runs, and he feels as if he's now won.
Vindicated. He's gotten back every person along that John Galt line. Yeah. So I want to just say that this is the typical abuse pattern, that you first engage the person and then you abuse them. Now he's abusing her throughout. And then when they start to get a glimmer, when the issue gets disclosed by Eddie, that's moving way on, and we're not going to get there quite yet. And then you have to discredit the person. They're a liar. So he is an abuser I want to say par excellence, but excellence, I don't like to apply to abuse. But let's move to their dating period and the proposal and the wedding. Jim is presenting her. He could do so much to protect her, but he doesn't. And the sob sister gives her some advice. The sob sister says, and then I'll turn it over to you, Andy. The sob sister, they're talking about the Cinderella girl and how great and altruistic James is for being the Democratic businessman. And the sob sister says, she's helping her before the wedding, but we can go back and talk about the proposal in this period too. You think that if one gets hurt in life, this is the sob sister helping her put on her wedding veil and getting dressed. You think that if one gets hurt in life, it's through one's own sins. And that's true in the long run. But there are people who'll try to hurt you through the good they see in you, knowing that it's the good, needing it, and punishing you for it. Don't let it break you when you discover that. So we can go back to, again, Andy, if you want to you can address whatever you'd like, but I was thinking we would go to the proposal and the whole wedding period.
Definitely, but I just want to say that Cheryl is analogous to Catherine Halsey in the Fountainhead. Katie destroyed deliberately by Toohey, and Cheryl Brooks destroyed deliberately by Jim Taggart. So the two arch villains in each novel each have their specific victim. And I think so much in Ayn Rand's fiction, her characters and everything, she's showing us showing us in action, dramatizing philosophic themes. And I think with both Katie and Cheryl, Ayn Rand is showing us that innocence is and good, a beautiful soul and good-heartedness is insufficient in itself to protect us from evil. That we need philosophy, we need philosophic understanding, and without it, this is what happens to good people. They're at the mercy of monsters. And I think this is the leitmotif of Cheryl's character. Beautiful soul, just a beautiful person. You'd be proud to have her for your daughter, or or your girlfriend, or your closest friend, or your wife, if you're a good person. But she's not, and she's young. If she survived longer, she may well have learned how to protect herself. But she's hit so young with such massive evil that it just and the evil in the world is pervasive. It's not just Jim Taggart. The world is being crushed. Even Dagny, she thinks is going to be crushed. So she's hit with such overwhelming evil at such an early age. Notice that the evil very often comes in the form of violent criminals, for sure. They don't profess to be serving society, but very often evil comes in the form of we're doing good for society, we're sacrificing for society, we're serving the state. This goes all the way back to Plato, at least that far. The evil often comes in masqueraded as a benign phenomenon. Like we care about the little guy, we care about the people, we care about the workers, we care about the oppressed minorities. But the ultimate goal is not only power, but we always have to remember there's power to create and there's power to destroy. And the Howard Rocks and the Dagny Taggarts and the John Galts have the power to create. The Ellsworth Tooheys and the Jim Taggarts seek the power to destroy, and they have it. And very often, real evil in the world masquerades as being virtuous. And if you don't if you don't know enough philosophy, you can't protect yourself from them.
They have to protect themselves fundamentally. That's why they have all this camouflage that makes them look like do-gooders, but they're fundamentally, James has to try to never face the fact of how evil he is. He's running his whole life from how evil he is, and he has to fake to himself all of this guff, as Ayn Rand might call it, the welfare guff. Shoshana, what would you like to add during the proposal, the dating, the proposal? What just talking about Cheryl's psychology during it all.
Oh, Cheryl, she's trying so hard to make the story really the benevolent fairy tale. And it's better than she ever expected, she thinks, but it's actually worse than she ever was afraid of, because as Carolyn Brashear said in an article about Cheryl, it was published some years ago, this James Taggart is, Cheryl may be the Cinderella girl, but he's no Prince Charming. You know, he's terrible, right? I think that what we have is that Cheryl keeps interpreting what's happening in the light of what these words would mean or these actions would mean if they came from a good person. And so, and she's ignoring that voice within herself that says no. I mean, you mentioned the proposal, you know, out on the landing with the trash all around. And then there's this little voice within her says, this is not the way she would have wanted it to have happened. And she could say that at least to herself. She could say that at least to herself. And she doesn't, or, you know, she could think, well, it's obviously she remembers it or it wouldn't be there in the novel, but she could say that to herself. No, this is not the way this ought to be. Something is wrong here. But Cheryl keeps, unfortunately, interpreting all of her objections as being negative reflections on herself. For example, he wants to give her things and she wants to have a better job. And he does not want to do that. And so she thinks, I shouldn't have asked. No, having a better job, which I'm sure she could do, you know, a job that she could actually do. This is not like Philip going to Hank and asking for a job, but, you know, a job that she could do. Well, that's earning her keep. That's a good thing. That he doesn't want to do it means he wants to keep her dependent on him. That he wants to make her feel bad about wanting it means he wants her to feel guilty for who she is. And it works. And it works. She says, well, I shouldn't ask you for anything.
Right.
Well, again, she could, if he weren't James Taggart, people could do things like some of the things that he does without being full-fledged James Taggarts. You know, I mean, a proposal is not always in a Hollywood setting. And okay, the thought came to him, he did something about it. But with real people, Cheryl could say, can we do this over again in a different place? But she ignores the fact that he keeps wanting to emphasize the way that she is the Cinderella girl and having her picture taken where she is instead of getting moved to a more suitable place. He wants to emphasize.
Her, right. Instead of protecting her.
Yeah, and
newsmen, the media.
Right. And she's got this dress that she spent a lot of her salary on to go to a party, and it's well, it's the best she knew how to get, but it makes her a figure of fun among other people. And he could have figured that one out. He lets her hear the nasty things the other guests are saying about Caligula's Horace. And Betty Pope says something that doesn't even get repeated to us, you know, that is so nasty, which again tells us something about that Betty Pope, that even though she didn't love James Taggart, she is somehow destructive. Maybe that makes her a good match for James Taggart. Maybe those two should get back together because she just wants to tear people down too. Yeah. Oh, and he could, as you say, he could protect her. Instead, he exposes her. And from her standpoint,
her very expensive things, the emerald bracelet
that don't fit with everything else about her. We're told she had that pin at the beginning when she was in the dime store, and that she wore it with spirit. And that was something she picked out herself. We're told the way she looks emphasizes how well she wore even the things she wore.
Yeah.
And well, she knew how to pick things that sort of fit her, even if they didn't fit the setting, but she doesn't know how to dress for this party. And he doesn't protect her. He doesn't protect her from the news people. He doesn't protect her from the guests. He doesn't protect her from Betty Pope. He doesn't protect her from...
He doesn't want to protect her. He wants to expose her. He wants to humiliate her because he wants to kill the people that she represents.
Yeah. And then the fact that he hasn't even arranged for her to get to the wedding. And the sob sister does that. Right. What does he want? What does he want? Her to take the subway in her wedding dress and to, you know, show up, you know, bedraggled. And, you know, it's as if he acts in ways that make him seem to be charitable, but the charity is not generous. It's
destructive.
It's destructive. It's denigrating. It's disparaging. It's lowering, because that's actually his purpose, even though he's the only one who knows it and she doesn't. So the dating is bad, and the proposal is bad, and the wedding is bad. And she keeps, meanwhile, taking in everything he says. We're going to get to the wedding in a minute here, because she doesn't know he's a big fat liar. And so she believes everything he says, including what he says about the enemy, Dagny,
Yeah.
right? And so at the wedding, she walks up to Dagny again, little Cheryl. She's not afraid. She's not afraid of Dagny. I think,
Yeah.
given the way that James Taggart thinks, she could figure, well, he seems to be afraid of Dagny. He seems to hate her. Well, I'm not afraid. I'm going to protect him against you. I'm the woman in this family now. And Dagny, of course,
Right.
says what she says. But I
And
think
she
it's,
says, I'm not putting on the sweet relative act.
yes.
Little
Yeah.
relative act. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, she's going to be honest. Okay. And I think that, of course, afterwards, she takes that back because she's learned something different. Again, that's Cheryl all over.
Yeah, we'll
That's
get
Cheryl
back
all
to
over. Right.
that.
If she learns better, she'll say better. But I
Right.
think it's actually a good mark on her part
Yeah.
that she's going to defend, well, Cheryl's going to defend James Taggart against Dagny, because he seems to be hurt by, and she's not going to let that happen. She's going to do what she can. That's going to be her gift.
Yeah.
So I think what you could say is that she ignores these little hints that she has that something is wrong here.
Yeah.
We're told that she's reeling through her days as if she's got sunstroke.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, she's not fully aware of everything that she ought to be aware of.
Taking in off all the data and saying, but it couldn't mean what it would in a different context, because he's James Taggart, the hero. So
Right.
that benefit of the doubt. Yeah, if I don't know if you have more, but then we'll turn to Andy.
Go ahead.
Shoshana, when you were speaking, I thought of something. Cheryl Brooks is a young woman. She has the potential to be Gwen Ives. She doesn't have the genius of Dagny Taggart, so she doesn't have the potential to be Dagny. But Gwen Ives is an extraordinarily efficient executive secretary for Hank Reardon. And that's an enormously productive and enormously valuable job. And Reardon acknowledges her, on several occasions, how important she is to the company, to Reardon Steel. And Cheryl has that kind of ability, that kind of integrity, that kind of work ethic. That's who she could grow into.
Ambition.
Yeah, she had ambition. That's right. So when she asked for a better job, you're right, Shoshana. She could do it. She's ready. She could climb her way up the ladder to a real level of responsibility, like Gwen Ives has at Reardon Steel, and any number of people who run companies or head departments and stuff. They'll tell you flat out, I couldn't do this without my secretary. I have this enormously efficient secretary, and usually a woman. Like sometimes it's a man, but she knows more about the day-to-day workings of the company or the department than I do. Talk to her. So that's who Gwen Ives is. She does it superbly, and that's who Cheryl Brooks would be if she wasn't killed by Jim Taggart.
Well, I think that in real life, some of those extremely efficient secretaries, executive assistants, actually could do jobs with greater scope and more responsibility, beyond what they're doing. And some of them, this is the most and the perfect match, and others, because of, well, circumstances or when they began working, so they are in fact qualified for that and more. Now, I think with Cheryl, it's a little too early to say because she's so young. And when we were talking about her virtues, I was thinking of Eddie. Sounds like Eddie Willers,
Mm-hmm.
and of course Eddie Willers. I think that I don't think he could actually be Dagny Taggart full time, but he's actually very good. You could say he's the Girl Friday for Dagny Taggart in that position, and that looks as if that's good for him, and including the fact that he can deal with Reardon, although Reardon does call him Eddie as opposed to Mr. Willers. So it's an interesting question about people and the right jobs for them, and what could they do if they had different circumstances and more time. And with Cheryl, I think especially that's true. We don't know what Cheryl, but I think you're right in saying that, that she has a lot of the qualities of Gwen Ives in the sense of, honest, conscientious, wants to do the job, eager to learn. And for that matter, Ayn Rand originally thought of having more of a backstory for Gwen Ives in the sense of her being from a family like Cheryl's family, that would burden her with unearned guilt, and that she'd have to get away from them and so on. So I think you're right that there's something in common there, and that it's a real loss in many ways, that and really unfortunate thing that Cheryl happened to meet the worst
Oh,
man
it's horrible.
for her.
So, yeah.
Yeah.
And neither one of those ladies has the potential to be a barroom bouncer, to
Except for Gwen I.
read in, but both of them,
Yeah.
That
both
was
of them,
great. Right.
yes, both of
So-
them have the ability to be extraordinarily efficient.
Yes, yes, that's true.
So I want to
Now,
take
now the truck driver in Atlantis, he could be the bouncer.
okay.
Remember
I
him?
want to take a moment just to show how cruel James is to her, to just drive home that abuse point. Now, Ayn Rand described Cheryl initially when we first meet her. Listen to the words. She gasped like a child at a burst of firecrackers. So Cheryl has, I mean, Gwen Ives is quieter, but Cheryl is just this firecracker.
Yes.
And then when the closing bell rang and she went to get her hat, she forgot about any decorum or anything. She probably doesn't even know it. She whirled around and ran like a streak to the door of the employees' quarters, forgetting her counter, her duties, and all feminine concern for never showing eagerness in accepting a man's invitation. So this is where we're starting. You've got this vibrancy, this delicious joie de vivre of Cheryl. And then you get, in the Valley, we'll talk about this much later, but they say the worst thing you can do to a child is to face them with a contradiction, the mother in the Valley. James is, this is his stock and trade. He continually faces her with contradictions. He says, true happiness is unhappiness. Pride is the worst sin. And she said at one point, this will be the quote that I'll read, but Mr. Taggart, this is her speaking. She's very puzzled and anxious by his flipping everything, his being so unhappy, his hating people, his jabs, the way he snaps all the time, or he jabs Hank Reardon, or he jabs his sister, making snide comments. She said, but Mr. Taggart, you got everything you wanted. Now you have the best railroad in the country. The newspapers call you the greatest business executive of the age. They say the stock of your company made a fortune for you overnight. You got everything you asked for. Aren't you glad of it? She felt frightened, sensing a sudden fear within him. And he says, no. She said, you'd rather the bridge had collapsed? I haven't said that, he snapped sharply. Then she shrugged, waved her hand in contempt, or he shrugged and waved his hand in contempt. You don't understand. Oh, I know. I have such an awful lot to learn, which is the point that you're making, Shoshana. And then she covers it over. She said she finally understood him. She said, it's great of you, Mr. Taggart, to think that your own achievement isn't good enough for you. I guess no matter how far you've gone, you still want to go further. You're ambitious. That's what I admire most, ambition. I mean, doing things, not stopping and giving up, but doing things. I understand, Mr. Taggart, even if I don't understand all the big words, because he's been telling her about the metaphysical contradictions of the universe by Simon Pritchett. So when I was talking about this with my husband last night, both of us were saying, this is a torture chamber for Jim, a well-earned torture chamber, because she's constantly giving him a mirror, even though he wants to tear her down. She's constantly giving him a mirror of everything he didn't accomplish. And I love that aspect of justice. But for her, it's horrific abuse. This is emotional abuse. So Shoshana?
Yeah, no, it's true, because she, it says it's as if she's listening to the higher mysteries. Well, these aren't higher mysteries. These are falsities. And she's not equipped to say, no, that's not right. That doesn't make sense. And yet she keeps trying. So it's kind of a torture chamber on both sides, which of course is the point they arrive at later. And he says, Hank Reardon, what's he so special? And he thinks he made Reardon. And she says, well, he did. Nobody else made Reardon metal. Didn't Hank Reardon do it? Tell me, Mr. Taggart, I don't get it. And and the thing is, it's almost even as if in that the old the fairy tale about the emperor's new clothes, that she's like the child who says, but the emperor's naked.
Yeah.
You know, and there's a sense in which James Taggart actually is naked, no matter how much he's
Empty.
pretending and other people have told him he's got clothes. And she says, well, oh, and so he's got to keep finding a way to make her go along with his lies, or at least not speak her own truth. And given that Cheryl is comfortable with the truth, she lives in reality, that's going to take some very serious bullying on his part, and lying,
Right.
and tearing her down. Yeah,
So
I think that's
let's
all
move
true.
now, and I'll go with you, Andy, but let's move now to when, after James makes this big deal and he's going to own Danconia Copper, they're leasing it, and he's going to own all the industries, at least temporarily as a lease, of the Southern Hemisphere. He's going to be the richest man in New York City. And Cheryl, by this point, has made herself into an amazingly loving woman who's wearing simple a brocade gown, and she's just polished. It's like My Fair Lady. She's just come into her own. Even though he's abusing her, she's trying to learn and to live up to who she thinks he is. And at that point, James comes home that night, and he basically, I call it his confession, even though he's not confessing. It's like Tui's confession, but he just starts to say, you know, I'm going to get these guys. So just her thought processes, her psychology, Andy, when she is faced with accumulating data of James is evil. What happens when he comes home? I can buy you your neighborhood. What do you want? What do you want? Nothing, nothing. You're just that period in her life when she's not the young shop girl anymore, but she's come into her own, and her eyes are now open.
Right. Well, this is there's this continuing development with Cheryl, and what is so lovable about her, what I have so much admiration for, and I think a lot of people do, is just how honest she is. You know, she'll dig to find the truth, even if the truth is painful, scary, harmful, dangerous. When she starts to realize, that Jim Taggart is not Dagny, that he's not the man she thought he was. She goes to Eddie Willers, who tells her the truth. She goes to other Taggart employees. Now, this is the president's wife, and so you can understand why Taggart employees, reluctant to talk. First of all, you want to tell, badmouth the president to his wife, and second of all, especially when the president, who has all his power, is such a bastard, to use Ayn Rand's term, and, and can really do you a lot of harm. But eventually Cheryl digs and digs, and she finds the truth. It's Dagny who runs the railroad, and Jim is a moocher. And then in the scene you're talking about, Ellen, when he comes in, he talks about breaking spines,
Exactly.
Yeah, the power. And she realizes, Cheryl, the truth seeker, Cheryl, the digger and digger and digger after truth, even when it's painful. She realizes that Jim Taggart desires the power to destroy. He does not desire or seek the power to create. He seeks the power to destroy. He wants to break Francisco d'Anconia's spine, because he's Francisco d'Anconia, because he's like this fountain of creativity, even though people think he's a playboy at this point, but he's Francisco d'Anconia. He's a giant. He's an absolute giant, he's just superbly able to deal with reality, and that's why Jim Taggart wants to destroy him. It's nihilism, the destruction for its own sake, and the hatred of the good for being the good, the desire to destroy those who can deal efficaciously with reality. And the pieces are falling into place for Cheryl. And now she realizes, she knew that by this time he was a phony and a fraud, and that he could be vicious. But now she's starting to see who he really is. As much as she's capable of understanding the horrendous truth here, she realizes he seeks the power to destroy, and especially the power to destroy the good. And it's just, you know, this is now starting her on, you know, on the road, the direct path to death. I mean, you know, Taggart's been laying the groundwork for this, but now he's starting to, in effect, pursue her to death.
Right. But
I think that
I'll turn it to you in a second. You said during that time, she is watching James Taggart, I don't, with this level attentive glance. The glance was worse than accusing. It was inquiring. Yes. Cheryl is soaking in information. And on top of that, he's saying that this is good for humanity and all of that welfare crap. And she says, I've never tried to hide that, because he says, you know, it's like you're from the slums and one has to be born into the finer feelings of altruism. And she said, I've never tried to hide that I came from the slum. And I haven't any sympathy for that welfare philosophy. I've seen enough of them to know what makes the kind of poor who want something for nothing. He did not answer, James. And she added suddenly, her voice astonished but firm, as if in final confirmation of a long-standing doubt. Jim, you don't care about it either. You don't care about any of that welfare hogwash. So Shoshana, you can take it from there, but she is someone who is just learning, getting the data. And when she finally stops doubting herself and looking at the data before her, she sees how evil he is. Go ahead.
Right. I was thinking back to something Andy said about Katie Halsey. And I'm remembering that one of the ways in which Toohey destroyed Katie was to tell her, you think too much. You got to stop thinking. Yeah. That's a problem. And well, this is, bad people do that to good people. They tell them not to think. And James Taggart does that to Cheryl. He tells her, you got to have faith in me. You're asking too many questions. Don't you love me? And she thinks, okay, I better be a better wife and so on. And then she realizes, and this is before she goes to Eddie Willers, that trying to be a good wife and to have faith in him is turning away when people discuss his job and refusing to look at newspaper mentions and, quote, slamming her mind shut against every evidence and every contradiction. And she stopped aghast by the question, what is it then, faith versus truth? And realizing that part of her zeal to believe was her fear to know, she set out to learn the truth with a cleaner, calmer sense of rightness. Okay, unquote. So
her ability to introspect there and say, I'm evading, pushing things away. I don't want to do that. That's not my style. And so she turns it around and looks at it, which is what Hank needed to do too. It's not that he's a negative evader, but he's evading all the things. He's putting it on him rather than looking at the facts. And so
you know what she just said about Hank's. That's actually right there in the novel, in which Francisco tells Reardon that you made the same mistake as that other woman in shutting your mind to something. You did it in a more nobler way, and that you push away the things that would clear you and help you. Yeah, and here, right, and here's Cheryl. As soon as she identifies it, you know, I'm not going to do that anymore. I'm not going to play that believe faith game anymore. I've got to go find out. You know, the truth is my friend. Right. And then she does.
Right. Auntie?
Yeah, it's a heartbreaking tragedy. She's such a good person. Her soul is so pure. She's so dedicated to the truth, to self-improvement. She works so hard to make herself worthy. She thinks, of James Taggart. And again, there's really, it's really the story of her relationship and marriage to James Taggart. There's a cautionary tale, in here about the necessity to be able to identify evil so that we can protect ourselves from it, because evil doesn't always come in the most overt and recognizable form. When Hitler's armies crash across the border into your country, it's easy to recognize that this is evil, and then you're mobilized to fight it. When you see the Soviet gulags or the Nazi death camps, you could see the evil, the criminal, the violent criminal, who perpetrates assault or rape or murder or these horrible crimes. It's easy to recognize that. The underlying nature of evil is philosophical, including for Hitler, including for the Nazis and the Soviets. There's a philosophy here. And the first cause of these evil events is philosophy, and I think Ayn Rand is showing us this again. She showed us this with Catherine Halsey, in The Fountainhead, and showing us again with Cheryl Brooks, that to defend innocence requires philosophy. So the question, of course, is philosophy, who needs it? We all do. We all do, and you deal with it, Dr. Kenner, or you dealt with it in your career, as a clinical psychologist with abusers, as you were talking about, and the victims need to recognize users, abusers, misusers. They need it. They need some depth of understanding, whether it's in some cases it's psychological, in some cases it's philosophical, some combination of that too, to protect themselves from evil. And Ayn Rand giving us a heartbreaking story here as a cautionary tale, as a warning. This is what happens to beautifully innocent human beings when they don't have the philosophy to recognize the nature of evil that in their own lives. It's a heartbreaking story, but it's poignant, and it's very, very fraught with philosophic meaning.
Yeah.
Now, what you're saying about needing to understand the evil to protect, I think, now I'll let you go in a minute, but I think it's really important to realize that she, even after she knows certain aspects of the truth about him, she feels that she believes that she infers that there's a deeper truth that she doesn't have yet. And we're told the ghost that was herself is still trying to understand. So she's still trying to understand him. And that's why she hasn't walked out the door yet. And well, I mean, that's kind of where we came in with Reardon. He's trying to understand his family, and she's been trying to understand, and she's figured some things out, but it's as if she understands there's something beneath what she's figured out, and that she's still trying to understand more, even though she's afraid that when she gets to the final answer, that'll be the end.
So she sees Eddie, and I thought that was such a unique scene with Eddie. I want to describe what Eddie does. She learns the whole story quietly and personally. The story about the John Galt line and James and Dagny's actual roles in it. She learns the whole story quietly and personally. Eddie pronounces no verdict, expressing no opinion, never encroaching on her emotions by any sign of concern for them, speaking with the shining austerity and the awesome power of facts. So she meets Eddie, and then she goes back to, and I think that paragraph itself is fascinating. The way Eddie deals with her. He gives her just the facts, ma'am, not all the evaluations. She'll make her own evaluations. But then she goes back to James, and she says, why didn't you tell me? Why didn't you tell me the truth? Why didn't you lie? And he was trying to make her feel guilty. She said, that night, those headlines, that glory, meaning the first night she met him, it was not you at all. It was Dagny. Shut up, you little bitch. And her dying words had been uttered. And at that point, it's just so tragic. And then she goes to Dagny, and she, she had this wonderful hero worship. And James too, he takes his glass at that time, and a glass, and he uses it like a butcher knife toward Francisco d'Anconia. But I will pass it to you, but I would back to you.
I think that what you just read about why did you let me think what I thought?
Yeah, go ahead.
It's so moving, but I think that's really speaking for Ayn Rand, because Ayn Rand couldn't stand it when she found, you lied to my face. How could you do that? Why did you let me think what I thought?
Oh, yes.
So
yeah, history of Ayn Rand. Yes. Oh my gosh.
Yeah, but I mean, even later, of course. But there's a famous story that line has always really hit me. Is that Ayn Rand she lets many characters speak for her, and this is one of them. Why did you let me think what I thought? Ayn Rand tells the story about the boy on the playground. You know that one?
No,
well, it's a good story, even though we don't have it documented. We don't have the boy. She was a little girl in a park, and there was sort of this merry-go-round kind of thing that you would grab onto the loop and you would swing around.
I know
And
those.
so she's on that, and people are waiting their turns. And she said this little boy asked her very nicely if he could have a turn, and he would just go around once, and then she could have it back.
Oh,
And she
I do
thought to
know. Right.
herself, he asked so nicely. Yeah. And so he gets on, and he comes around, and he doesn't get off. He doesn't, and she said, but he said, you didn't keep your word. And so she went after him.
Right.
And she tells that there was blood on the playground that day because she couldn't believe it, that he would break his word. Why did you tell me that if you weren't going to do it? And it wasn't, if somebody just grabbed the merry-go-round, that'd be one thing, but he told her that, and she went by his word. And then, why did that happen? And the fact that she was remembering this, 50 plus years later, why did you let me think what I thought? Why did you tell me that if it wasn't going to be true? And I think she gives it to Cheryl because that's so, why did you let me think what I thought?
Why did you lie to me? Why did you lie? And then she goes to Dagny, and I'll read this and then turn it over to you, Andy. But this is my favorite. I would say maybe my second. I have two top favorite quotes in the book. This is my favorite. Dagny, how did you do it? She apologizes to Dagny, and Dagny invites her in, sensing that there's something terribly amiss. And the justice of Cheryl just saying, I had it in reverse. I always thought that James was you and you were James. And she said to Dagny, how did you do it? How did you manage to remain unmangled? And Dagny says, by holding to just one rule, which? To place nothing above the verdict of my own mind. You've taken some, and this is Cheryl, you've taken some terrible beatings, maybe worse than I did, worse than any of us. What held you through it? And Dagny says, the knowledge that my life is the highest of values, too high to give up without a fight. And she says, Dagny, her voice was a whisper, that's what I felt as a child. That's what I seem to remember most about myself, that kind of feeling. And I never lost it. It's there. It's always been there. But as I grew up, I thought it was something that I must hide. I never had a name for it, but just now when you said it, it struck me that that's what it was. Dagny, to feel that way about your own life, is that good? Cheryl, listen to me carefully. That feeling which with everything which it requires and implies, is the highest, noblest, and only good on earth. And Cheryl says, the reason I ask is because I wouldn't have dared to think that. Somehow people always made me feel as if they thought it was a sin, as if it were the thing in me in which they resented and wanted to destroy. And I'll end with this. It's true. Some people do want to destroy it. And when you learn to understand their motive, you'll know the darkest, ugliest, and only evil in the world, but you'll be safely out of its reach. So she tells this to Cheryl right before the final scene.
Yes, but of course it's not true.
Yeah.
Because Cheryl does come to understand it, and she's not out of its reach.
Right, because she makes one final error. She thinks Dagny is just an anomaly, that the good doesn't exist in the world. And especially when she's hit with the social worker and the memories of the preacher from her youth and Jim.
And Lillian and so on. And it's because she thinks she can't get away.
Oh, right, and
but you see, Dagny knows there's a problem, and Dagny says, don't go home tonight.
Yeah.
And she goes. And Cheryl also said, there's one more thing I have to do to tell this to you. And what is this one more thing I have to do? What's Cheryl thinking?
Yeah. Right.
And so Dagny says things that are wise, but that part about being free from its reach when you understand it, that's not true, because if she still thinks, Cheryl does, that evil has power.
Right.
And if you think evil has power, and if you think you can't get away from it.
And the horrific scene, Andy, I don't know if you want to jump in and talk
about.
Yeah,
I just wanted to, Kira Ogwenova understands this, but she's not free of it because she lives in the Soviet Union. Mm-hmm. And the bad guys have tremendous power. Now, in the universe of Atlas Shrugged, they haven't established a totalitarian state yet, but they're very close. And so the bad guys do have tremendous political power. They don't have metaphysical power. They can't create, but they have terrible social political power they can destroy, and she is caught in that web. So it's her error is understandable. Yeah, it would have been much better for her if she had stayed with Dagny, and and not gone gone back to Jim to do what, to tell him that she wants a divorce, that they're finished. She do that over the telephone. You stay as far away from that bastard, as she should. But there's some reality basis for Cheryl's belief. Evil in this universe does have a terrible amount of social power, and they are capable of destroying. She doesn't know about the strike. She doesn't know that she has no way of knowing about the strike. She just sees all these great minds disappearing, and society is, intellectual culture and society are collapsing. It's an understandable error. Where's she going to go? She go back to Dagny, but like, she thinks Dagny's caught up in this too. So I think I think Cheryl makes an honest error here. I think she should go back to Dagny, and maybe when they find out about the strike, maybe Cheryl, her spirit and her honesty and her work ethic belongs in the valley, just like Eddie Willis, just like Glenn Ives, and so maybe she could be safe. But I just want to say it's an understandable error. She's surrounded by a political situation which is bad and getting worse. The world of Atlas Shrugged, by the end, it's very close to full totalitarianism. So
Right. And she kills herself.
And she
she's from a similar world to the world that Kira is caught in, just not quite that extreme yet.
And she kills herself in self-preservation. That's the phrase, she's preserving the person she is, like Eddie not wanting to go with those other people, the covered wagon. She's preserving herself. She jumps over the parapet, and all of us would want to have her have a soft landing in a boat there, James Bond boat, to bring her back. But she was preserving the person she is. She couldn't live. Her premise about the world was, as you're saying, Andy, it was pretty spot on in the culture she was living in and in her context, but tragic because.
Right, you see, Kira tried to escape, and understandably so. There was still a free world beyond the borders of the Soviet Union, and she's murdered by the communists. For Cheryl, she doesn't know about the strike. There's no physical escape. The whole world, the people states, Ayn Rand tells us, the United States is the last place, that's semi-free. So the society is very, very, very destructive. They have terrible. The bad guys have terrible power. So it's Kira dies in the attempt to escape, and preserving her integrity to the end, her commitment to her own life. And Cheryl dies preserving her own in integrity, also escaping from the evil, getting beyond their reach to preserve, her the purity of her spirit. So there's interesting parallels between her life and death and Kira's life and death.
I think it's completely true that she doesn't know she can get out, and maybe physically be very hard for her to get out. And it's also, she understands in a really philosophical level what's so bad about the world she's in. It's not limited to the political. She says they've got the red and green lights backwards. She says that there's something that they're out to get me. What do you want of me? What do you want of me? That everyone in the world, everything is James Taggart writ large, and she can't get away. Now, you see, when she goes back from Dagny and she sees that there's a woman, and he tells her who it is. And now she says, what is this? And of course, it's a way of expressing what he thinks he can get something good in this world by tearing down other people, and as if he's somehow insulted Hank Reardon. And she thinks, Hank Reardon is a victim too, and Dagny's a victim too. And she says, well, do you want a divorce? And he says, don't you think you're getting out of here alive that way? And you can see how little Cheryl could think that, yeah, maybe he's got the power, and I can't get away from him.
So psychologically, when we look at Cheryl, if you look at the issues that I've talked about on at least one other time, that as a psychologist, I look at your premises about yourself. She just has blossomed. She trusts herself. She's got self-esteem by the end of the story. Her view of others is pretty damn accurate at the end of the story. Unfortunately, she's not living in the valley. She's living in hell. So that premise, just the reality of it is going to feel very destructive. Her view of the world we've just addressed that it's just a hellish place where good people, it's an anti-hero worshiper realm. And her view of her future looks pretty bleak. I mean, you've just got Dagny as one little island, but nobody else. And so you can see why she jumped over that the parapet.
There's no place to go. That's the difference with
And
Kira.
the social worker is just the last.
Yeah, that's another.
Yeah.
An,
So
another.
any final thoughts on Cheryl? I've really said what I wanted. I love Cheryl, and I think we all do.
I think
well,
for me that's a wrap. Actually, I go back to Kira for a second. If Kira can get across the Finnish border, there's a free world for her.
Yeah.
But there's no free world anywhere for Cheryl. It's all communist. So there's no place to escape to. She doesn't know about the strike. So to preserve her spirit and her integrity, I saw it's an understandable choice that she makes. And it's again Ayn Rand showing us the fate. I think Cheryl represents, just like Catherine Halsey in The Fountainhead, the fate of non-philosophical, innocent, good-hearted people in a world where evil is gaining more and more social power, and they don't have enough philosophical understanding to protect themselves. I think Ayn Rand is showing us something really, really important here about self-preservation. The need for philosophy. Yeah, philosophy. Who needs it? We do.
Yeah, and I think that there's a sense in which both of those, Katie and Cheryl are tragic stories, but in The Fountainhead, Katie becomes the social worker. And so here she is on the job and, preaching self-denial to Cheryl. And Cheryl, as you say, that's self-preservation. And she says, no, not your world. And of course, no. Yeah, that's knows the word that John Galt says, right? That there comes a time in the life of any man of virtue when his consent is needed for evil to triumph. And I pronounced a word in my mind, and the word was no. And Cheryl says no, and she dies no, because she doesn't want to be tortured. She puts herself out of their reach.
Right. That's a good point, Shoshana. I never thought of that. Catherine Halsey becomes the social worker who confronts Cheryl Brooks, the last straw for Cheryl. That you're right. They could easily be the same person. They have the same. By the end of The Fountainhead, Catherine Halsey has that soul of the social worker who was the last straw for Cheryl Brooks.
Yeah. And one of the things that I love that I read that paragraph that I read here, that segment with Dagny, to many of my clients in therapy, just to help them know that the two things that they need to do are to trust their own mind and to pursue their values, their rational values, obviously, and never give those up. And also to be on guard, as Andy, you were talking about evil, how it functions very surreptitiously, very in cagey ways, and to be able to never accept an unearned guilt. So
in a few years, I'm going to write a book on the nature of evil. The book on heroes is not going to be a fun book to write.
No,
but or to read. But I think it will be instructive.
No, I did a whole class on psychological self-defense. I framed it that way. From the good person's point of view, how do you protect yourself from evil people? And you need to be able to detect envy, detect hatred of the good for being the good, people who want to hold you back from pursuing your values. So we will wrap it up with Cheryl, unless there are any final words.
I'll just give one little final word, which is I was talking about Cheryl just a little bit ago because on the James Valiant was doing an analysis of the Marilyn Monroe essay by Ayn Rand, and I heard that he was doing that, so I came on also because the Ayn Rand's essay about Marilyn Monroe has always reminded me of Cheryl. And if you look at that essay, the way that Marilyn Monroe, as quoted, felt that she was the victim of envy and that other people tried to hurt her through the good in her.
Yeah.
And I think so. In other words, Cheryl can come in different forms of not just a 19-year-old, but even a world famous movie star can be a Cheryl. and or can be a client in your office or a student in my class. And so I guess it's like evil that good can come in different forms as well, but there's an essence to it, an
So we
essence to
all
that kind of
want,
innocence.
right, we all want to keep that that 19-year-old Cheryl, that exuberance for life within us, and not let anybody destroy it, including ourselves.
Yes.
So thank you both. This is Dr. Shoshana Milgram and Dr. Andy Bernstein. I'm Dr. Ellen Kenner, and we thank you for joining us today.
Thank you.
Thanks, Alan, Shoshana. It's been fun.